Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Daled in Baba Basra for Achenokol Beis Yisrael and Sun Batzar Shifir. The last line on Nun Gimel on the Beis. Amar Yomi Birav. Rabbi said Amar Yuda. Hayman. The Shada lifta of a Pili Dara. If a man tries to acquire something, make a kinyan, simply by throwing some turnips or vegetable seeds into crevices in the ground, the ger, pili the ara the ger, to acquire it that way, it's not a chazaka. Again, let's review. A chazaka of 3 years that we talked about most of the time in the parak, that's proof of purchase. You have a claim that you bought it, you had a star, you lost the star, or it was given to you as a gift, you had a deed that it was given to you as a gift, and after 3 years you don't have it anymore, but 3 years occupation with a claim that you received it properly, you bought it, it was gifted to you, you inherited it, some sort of a claim, that's good enough. Here we're not talking about that kind of a chazaka. Here we're talking about a chazaka that shows ownership. You have to acquire it by showing ownership. How do you do that? By putting a lock on the door, by, if the place was fenced in, breaking through the fence, cutting the fence down, or by putting up a fence around it. You have to show ownership, and Rashbam explains you have to do it with kavanah. You have to do it with kavanah. So where are those things necessary? Let's understand something. If I'm buying something from you, there's a mocher and a lokeach, and we agree, I paid you, shook hands, shtar, or you said, here are the keys. Here are the keys, right? Keys are in the car, right? Here are the keys. That's good enough. The keys, that shows ownership. Because there somebody else is giving it to you. There's a makna, there's a person who is giving it over to you. Remember, always with kinyan, you have to have somebody giving it to you. If he's giving it to you, that's his kavanah. Otherwise, Mashiach Hagbal, all these kinyanim don't work. I can't just steal your stuff and make a kinyan on it. You have to want to give it to me. So there, a simple kinyan like handing over the keys is good enough, right? Handing over the keys or showing him the place is good enough. Rashbam said on yesterday's daf, as long as you gave him the keys, when it comes to a renter or a seller, that's okay. However, if there's nobody giving it to you, for example, it's hefker. You have to demonstrate ownership. Demonstrating ownership means you have to occupy the land in some way, either sleep there, take it over. If it's a field, work on the field, do something to improve the field. That's what you have to do in order to show ownership. And Rashbam explains on this stuff, on Nandali, you need two things. You have to some improvement in the land, and also you have to have kavanah that because the shame tikkun kidei lachs, you want to acquire it. So here we're talking about, in many of these cases, we saw yesterday, many cases we're only speaking about when you're acquiring it from hefker. For example, in a chasam of a ger, we talked in the chasam of a ger. If a ger was Megayer, a person converted to Judaism, and he had no children after he converted. So when he died, there were no heirs at all. He had no heirs. So in a case like that, anybody can acquire it, but they have to show ownership. You can't just say, I took the keys. Took the keys from whom? Nobody gave it to you. You have to show ownership. And that's the kind of chazaka that we're talking about over here. That you have to show ownership. Now, showing ownership certainly helps, is even better than handing over the keys. If the previous owner, the seller, gave you the keys, that's good enough. But if you're not acquiring it, many of these cases are where you're acquiring it from hefker. Then you have to demonstrate ownership. That's the chazaka that we mean. A chazaka demonstrating ownership. So when we say that karka is nikna with kesef shtar chazaka, kesef or a shtar or a chazaka, we mean this kind of a chazaka demonstrating ownership. And Rashbam throughout has been saying over here that even though technically you could acquire with cash, here's the cash, that's good enough. But generally, the general rule was that the intention was not there until there was either a shtar or chazaka with it too. Cash alone wasn't there. Cash could be a loan. You don't know for sure that it's a demonstration of ownership, of acquisition. So here, Rav Yomi says in Rav Yudah that if you just throw some seeds into the ground, the chasam of a ger, that's not a chazaka. My timer on the second line on Nundala, my timer. When you threw it in there, you didn't improve it. In other words, if you put a lock on it and you locked the door, you wanted to take over this field, or you locked the fence, or you broke through the fence, that's demonstrating something. Even if you sleep there, they're demonstrating something. But you threw a few seeds into a crevice without turning the dirt over, doing something to improve it. No, you haven't done anything. The time that you threw the seeds, there was no improvement. Now, later on, 6 months later, maybe it's starting to grow. right? Hashta the kashavach mamel kashavach. It's growing by itself. You didn't do anything. You have to demonstrate ownership, or even better, demonstrate an acquisition of ownership. Amar Shmuel, Haiman the pashach dikla. Similarly, let's say you stripped a tree of its branches. You started stripping branches off. Adaita the dikla. If your intention was there to acquire the tree that way, somebody sold you a tree, or it was a tree that belonged to Hefker, and you want to demonstrate ownership, by stripping it, like you're improving the root. Pardon, pruning it. Yeah, pruning it. Yeah. So adaita the chiyusa. But let's say you were stripping off the branches because you wanted to feed the fruits that were growing on the branches to your animals, or you were, little chips or whatever they were going to eat. So if it was for your animals, lokani, that's not an acquisition of the tree. You just stripped it off. Let's say it belonged to nobody. It was Hefker. It was in the desert, or it was from a ger who belonged to a ger who died. So died to the chiyusa. How can you tell? How can you tell? Can you discern his intention from the way he stripped the tree of its branches? Yes. If he took the branches off from all around the tree, all sides of the tree equally, then it shows that he was trying to acquire the tree. He was trying to use that as a form of acquisition. However, if he just stripped them off on one side, he was just stripping them off to give to his animals. So you can't tell. You would now, if he said specifically, "I'm doing this to acquire it," maybe it would, but that's not demonstrating ownership. If you're pruning a tree, you're pruning it on all sides, not on one side. Another thing that he said, Haiman, the Zochi Zichya. If a man was removing the branches, the chips of wood from the field, right? Rashbam says here that the Zochi Zichya, he says, Machabed, he's cleaning up, he's cleaning the field, he's like weeding the field, taking away chips and weeds and things like that. If he's weeding the field, does that show ownership or not? I'm on the Zochi Zichya. If his intention was to acquire the land that way, it's a good chazaka. In the chazaka, an acquisition, in the way we're talking about chazaka, that it's a form of demonstrating acquisition. But let's say he wants it for the chips. Maybe he wants it for the wood. Maybe he wants to use it for firewood, for fuel. So if he's using it for fuel, if he's doing it to gather the fuel, that's not demonstrating ownership. So it depends what he did. Now, again, Hechidami, how can you tell? Shakal Rabbi Zitri, if he takes all of the chips and all of the weeds, big ones and little ones, then obviously he's doing it to show acquisition, that he's demonstrating ownership of the field. Shakal Rabbi Zitri, if he took the big ones and left the small ones, then it shows that he wants it for fuel. He doesn't want to bother with the small ones. He just wants it for the fuel, and that doesn't demonstrate ownership. So in all these cases, if you didn't demonstrate ownership and it was Hefker, somebody else could take it. Okay, just gathering fruits by itself does not demonstrate ownership, Rashbam says. Like it eats in this row, low kani, the whole akita is pretty low kani. Just gathering fruits does not make it an acquisition. Okay, so Rashbam said before, in the case where you strip the tree of its branches, even though a person normally is trying to do it for acquisition, when you can say either one, we assume as we give him the benefit of the doubt. But if he's only stripping off the branches from one side, that shows that he's not really intending to acquire the field. And the same thing, if he is cleaning up the field, weeding it, and only taking the big weeds and the big chips and leaving the small ones, that shows that he's not cleaning up the field to show ownership. He's simply gathering firewood, gathering fuel. Amar Shmuel, I'm on the iskil, the askil tikla. If a man here is leveling the field, Rashbam says that he is removing all the obstacles and trying to make the field flat. In other words, when you want to work a field, you want a flat field. You don't want a field with heaps and hills and valleys and holes in the ground. So if you are removing the takalot, he's removing the takalot, probably he's removing the obstacles. Adaitadar, again, if he's trying to acquire the field that way, showing ownership, he acquires it. If he wants to just use it as a temporary threshing floor, because he wants to process the food there, so he doesn't need it to be so exact, doesn't need it to be a flat, then he doesn't acquire it, because he's not showing ownership. How can you tell? If he takes the heaps, and he puts them into the holes. In other words, he takes the heaps of dirt and throws them into the holes to flatten so that the whole field would be flat. Then a daitadara. That shows that he wants to acquire the field. Mulya b'mulya b'natza a daitadara. But let's say simply every time there's a little heap or a little hill in the field of dirt, and he just sort of smooths it out, not max pushes it down to flatten it out a little bit, but he doesn't take those heaps and throw them into the hole, or benatza, or he diminishes the hole. He collapses the hole a little bit by pushing the sides in. So then a daited bodar, he's just using it for a temporary threshing floor. Rashbam says over here, then he's simply for beating the wheat and not for plowing. Now these chazakas word for nechsei ger, showing ownership, or matan or mecher. We said for a matan or mecher, you could also do it just handing over a key. Handing over, that's also good. Or brothers are dividing up the Yerusha. These chazakas work for all these if they're a demonstration of ownership. Let's say you want some water. There's a nearby river or channel of water, and now you have wall. Let's say there's a wall around your field, and you want to open up the wall and allow water to come into your field. Is that a demonstration of ownership? It's not your field yet, right? It's not your field. You want to show ownership. Is that a way of showing ownership? Again, either if it certainly works if somebody sold it to you, but even if nechsei ager, how is that a demonstration of ownership? So if you opened up a water channel into your field, if your intention was to acquire the field, the ground, then you acquire it. But let's say you did it in order to catch fish. There was a river there, and you know how you catch fish? You open up like a little sluice or whatever, a hole in the wall, and you let the water come in. And as the water splashes through your field, as the water level goes down, at first a lot comes in, and fish wind up on your ground. It's a good way to catch fish. So if it's only to catch fish, honey, that doesn't show ownership of the field. How can you tell? So pasach trei babi, if you opened up two gates, chad ma'al v'chad ma'afik, one for the water to come in and one for the water to go out, that shows you just wanted the fish. You didn't want the water to irrigate the field. You were just opened up, let's say, upstream. When the field was, let's say, on not a level. You opened up at the top for the water to come in, and then at the bottom for the water to run out. You wanted to catch the fish. Okay, chadbab, if you only open up one gate, then you wanted the water to come in to irrigate the field. That's a demonstration of ownership. You're working the field. Now, the story goes like this. Going back to the case where you ate it, where you stripped the tree of branches and you did it only on one side, that doesn't show ownership. So there was a woman, she worked the field, or worked the tree rather. She was on a field. She had a chazak on a field, betafshicha. Again, by stripping off the branches, like we said before. If it's on one side, it looks like for animals, and she only did it on one side. Placed it on for 13 years. 13 years she had this tree, and she would strip off the branches. Now, Asahu, the man came. What kind was of girsa? Asahu Gavra, man came. Rafik to Seifurta. He hoed a little bit. He dug up a little bit under the tree. Askam Levi, they came before Levi. Sometimes from Mukba. They gave him the field. They gave him the tree. The tree presumably had no previous owner, right? We'll see. Let's say they had a previous owner. It was Hefker, and she was, she had possession of the tree, but she only stripped it on one side. Stripping it on one side does not show ownership. And the guy comes along, and now he did something to show ownership. He shoveled a little bit. He hoed underneath there, weeded a little bit under the tree. Whatever he did there, pruned the tree. But he did it properly, and either Levi or Ma'ukva said, yeah, he gets to keep it. Also, because she came crying. She came crying for him. And she said, listen, I've been here for 13 years. What do you mean he's got it? What can I do for you? You did not acquire it. You didn't deal with it. You didn't occupy it, let's say. You didn't occupy it the way normally a person who owns it. A person normally occupies it. Well, if you want to treat the tree, prune it, you prune it from all sides. This that you did it only on one side, you did not show ownership. Mefarshim say an interesting thing over here. you have to presume that within the 13 years, somewhere along the line, she must have dug a little bit around the tree also. She didn't just take off the branch. She must have done something in 13 years, something. But that didn't help her. Why? Because when she did that, she didn't have kavanah to acquire it. She thought she acquired it by just stripping off the branches on one side. That's not an acquisition. In other words, as we said, you have to demonstrate ownership and you have to have a kavanah. If somebody is mazaka something for you, if there's another party, yeah, you picked up $100 bill and you said, I'm picking it up for this guy, yeah, you could do that. But if you have to, otherwise you have to, if you're doing it yourself, you have to show ownership. You didn't show ownership. You didn't show ownership by stripping it on one side. And if you did dig a little bit, you didn't have kavanah to acquire it that way. So they gave it to the guy who picked it up from the second person who came along. Omarav, Hatzar Tsura ben Ger. If you paint a picture on the chasam of a ger, again, that had it's like hefker, nobody is acquiring it, that's also a demonstration of ownership kana. Why? How do we know that? The Rav, like we said this, Rav says, Rav himself, lo kani l'ginsa, the Bay Rav ela betsursa, he acquired like a garden nearby his yeshiva, also by making a picture there. Now, in yesterday's Gemara, we said that if you found a house that belonged to a ger and you plastered it or you made a mural on it on the front of it, that's good enough. If it's an amma bayama. Here Rashbam says that's if you just if you're trying to acquire it with simply a mural or a plaster. But here where you made a shape, you made a form, a picture of an animal of some sort, it doesn't have to be a mama and it doesn't have to be on the front. That's also the demonstration of ownership. It's like you're living there. That shows ownership and you acquire it that way. Itmar, at the 2 dots, 4 lines from the bottom page. Itmar, so let's say you have a field that's clearly defined by its borders, right? It's got clear set borders, and now you want to acquire it. As soon as you put one shovel into the ground, one shovelful, you acquire the whole field. That shows ownership. Because why? Because there's boundaries there. There's a fence around the whole field. It's clearly defined, right? You know what it is. And how do you show ownership there? Well, if you start digging one spadeful, one shovelful, that's good enough. No, that's not good enough. You have to show more ownership. Just doing one shovelful, that's all you acquired was one shovelful. You don't get any more than that. Now this is where it's clearly defined, right? Rashbam says, and then Rashbam says over here, it makes no difference if it's a sale or nechsei ger, right? According to Rav, you acquired the whole thing. According to Shmuel, you only get that. Dafim nechsei ger, as we said. So here we're saying like this. Shmuel says that doesn't acquire it. But I said before, handing over the keys is good enough. You don't have to do a lot of work. Ein achanami. He says, Rashbam, 2 lines from the bottom of the page, where going on Shmuel, who says you only acquire the one shovelful of nechsei ger. That's not a full demonstration of ownership. Avomecher v'kibul zuzeh. But if you sold it and you paid for it, and afilu asasados v'esher medinos v'chzik v'achzman kana. Let's say I own 10 fields in China, in the United States, in Australia, all over the world. And I bought, I owned all these, and you bought them from me. You gave me $1 million, and I sold you all my fields. And you made a kinyan in one of them. You acquire all of them because they're all considered one attached. So that's good enough, even though you didn't even touch the other fields. The first parak of Bakama, the first parak of Bakama of the Kedushin, and so we have this machlokas Rav and Shmuel. If you have a clearly defined, demarcated field, and you made a kinyan just by sticking a shovel into it, Rav says you acquire the whole field because that's a clear demonstration of ownership, even if it's nechsei ger. Shmuel says no. That would work if it's a sale or a gift, but it doesn't work if nechsei ger. That's not a full demonstration of ownership. Now, here's an interesting thing at the bottom of the page, the last line. Rashbam says, Rav. Even though normally we say in a machlokas Rav and Shmuel, what's the rule? If it's isurim, we paskin like Rav. If it's masomatan, commercial issues, then we go like Shmuel. Well, this is a commercial issue. The Rashbam says Rav. Why? The Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman was the later posek in Bavel. Rav Nachman Ovid Uv the Kavase the Rav Kamamishmaitin, because Rav Nachman went like Rav. So even though we have a general rule, Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, comes to money matters, we go like Shmuel. When it comes to Yisurim, we go like Rav, but not in all cases. And the way is that you look at the later posek. So I was thinking that that's why? Because Rav Nachman Paskin's like him. Because a posek, when posek today is looking at different how do you paskin a shaila, he looks at all the rabbis who paskin, the later ones had the earlier ones sock in front of them too. So if they changed their rule of an earlier one, they saw some reason to change it. So a posek can't say, well, I saw there was a posek who said something 1,000 years ago. Yes, but many other rabbis in between changed that. So you have to look at the latest one because they had reason to change it. So here you can say the same thing too. When Rashbam says, here we paskin like Rav, even normally when it comes to money matters, commerce, you paskin like Shmuel, but Rav Nachman clearly went like Rav. So here we have machlokas Rav and Shmuel by a field that had clearly defined borders, right? On Amid Beis now, but if let's say it doesn't have clearly defined borders, ad kama. So here Rashbam says ad kama means how much do you have to do to show ownership? According to Rav. According to Shmuel, even a clearly defined field, if you stuck a shovel in, you only got that shovel full. If it's nechsei ager, I only got a shovel full. So certainly, if the field is not defined, you're not going to get more than a shovel full if you get that. But according to Rav, who says that one shovelful acquires you the whole field by a clearly defined, a field that has clear boundaries. What happens if it doesn't have clear boundaries? What do you say? It says b'shem tzimisuras ad kama. Amar Papa could also tyra the shuri or the tyra the turi. If you have a yoke of oxen, 2 oxen who make a furrow in one direction across the whole field and back, so they made 2 furrows basically. That shows ownership. Then you get the whole field. In other words, if it's a clearly boundary, the field had clear boundaries. All you need is a shovelful, according to Rav. If it didn't have clear boundaries, then you have to make 1 furrow going up and 1 furrow going down, 2 furrows to do it. Now, that's how Rashbam learns the question. Ad kama means how much do you have to do to show ownership? Tosas, though, the top Tosas says, Pirish kama yikne b'makushechet. According to Rav, the question was this. Rav says if it's has clear boundaries, clear borders, then 1 shovelful does it, right? If it doesn't have clear borders, how much does 1 shovelful do? Pirish kama yikne b'makushechet. And that he says 1 shovelful gets you 2 furrows. Not that 2 furrows is what you have to dig to get the whole field, but rather 1 shovelful gets you to it. So here Rashbam and Tosas differ on the question over here is what is kama? Ad kama, according to Rashbam, is ad kama. How much do you have to dig? How much do you have to process in the field to show ownership of the whole field? And according to Tosas is how much do you acquire with 1 shovelful? Amar Rav Yidam Shmuel. Listen to this. Let's say you buy something from a guy. Harain Kamidbar. It's like you're buying it from a desert. What does it mean by that? Whoever acquires it gets it. Meaning, you made a deal with Clyde, and you bought from the guy. You paid him $1,000 for this field, but you didn't make any formal acquisition. You didn't get a star. So you know what? If somebody else comes and takes it, they get it. Reuven bought a field from a guy, and he paid for it, but he didn't make a kinyan, and he didn't get a star. So until he gets a star, if Shimon comes along and takes the field, makes an acquisition on, he gets to keep it. Now there's a machlokas among the Rishonim. Well, does he have to pay Reuven for it? Shimon is a Rasha, not a nice thing to do. You know, that guy paid for it and you took it. Okay, so Shimon's called a Rasha. But does he owe the money to Reuven? Maybe not. Some say he doesn't owe the money to Reuven. Reuven can go back to the guy and say, I didn't get the field. Maybe he'll try to get his money back. But that's the halach of Shmuel. Now this is going to be a dispute over here. But Shmuel says, it's like hefker. Once you pay whoever, in this case, what do you mean it's like hefker? Once somebody paid the guy for it, it's not like hefker. You have to make a kinyan, or somebody else can grab it ahead of you. My time explains why. As soon as the guy got the money, he abandoned it. He says, not mine anymore. I'm not concerned anymore. He gave up his ownership on it. It's like he abandoned it. Yisrael but Yisrael doesn't get it until he gets a star, right? He's got to have a star because that's the halacha by goyim. You have to have a star. Even by Jews, we said the common thing was, even though we said that tarkas b'chesed star chazaka, but normally the common rule was that if you didn't have a star or a chazaka, you didn't acquire it. So The Reuven who bought the field from the guy gave up the field as soon as he got the money. Now it's hefker. If Shimon came along and grabbed it, it's his. Right. He paid for it. Paying isn't good enough. Paying for it is not a kinyan. Isn't good enough. Now, if somebody took it away from Shimon, took it away from Shimon's a bad guy because he took it away after all Reuben paid for it, but Reuben never acquired it. As soon as he paid, the rule is, what Shmuel's saying is that if you pay a guy for a field, the guy is no longer on the field, but you didn't acquire it yet. So therefore, if Shimon acquired it ahead of you, he got it. The star would be okay, but he doesn't have a star. So now this is it's pretty strange halacha, right? Shmuel says somebody else could take it out from under you. I'm only a Abai Rav Yosef. So Abai turned to Rav Yosef and he said, how could Shmuel say something like this? Can Shmuel really say this? Shmuel said, Dina de Malchus Dina. We know a famous rule when it comes to Isurim, and when it comes to money matters, commerce, not when it comes to Isurim. Dina Malchus Dina does not mean that if the magistrate in New York State says you're divorced, because it's Dina de Malchus Dina. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to Isurim, there's no thing as Dina. Let's say Dina Malchus Dina says you have to work on Shabbos. You don't have to follow that. Then when it comes to Isur, you don't follow. But when it comes to money matters, financial, commerce, Dina Malchus Dina. So Dina Malchus Dina, okay. Didn't Shmuel say Dina Malchus Dina? Umalka Omer, and the king said, what's the king? It is the person who is running the country, the person who runs the country, the owner of the country, so to speak, right? The supreme power. Malka Omer, the only way you acquire land is with a deed, and you don't have a deed. So how does Shimon acquire this? Reuben paid for it, but he didn't get a star. Shimon can just come and take it, but he needs a star. There's no star here. He doesn't have a star. The guy wouldn't give him a star either because Shimon didn't buy it from him. So how could Shmuel have said this? Amarle, so Rav Yosef answered him, best answer Baya, look, I only know a story. I know a Maisa. I'll answer you a Maisa. You ask me about Shmuel, I'll ask you a Maisa. Why? There was a Uvdahavi, there was a Maisa, the Dura Darusa, in this city called Dura Darusa. Rashbam says it's either the name of a city or it could be a village of shepherds. Be Israel, the Zav and Aram Evcham, a story like this. A Jew, Reuben, bought a field from a guy. And Shimon came along and dug up a little bit. Reuben did not have a document. He just paid for it. And now Shimon came along and dug up a little bit under it. Oscar came for a Biuda, and Rav Yehuda said, Biuda Deshani gave, Shimon gets to keep it. So I know a story like this. He says, you ask me how could Shmuel have said that? He didn't answer the question directly. How could Shmuel have said that? Shmuel said, Dina Malchus Dina. He didn't answer his question. He says, I have a story. Maisa is very strong. There's a Maisa like that. So Abaye said, you can't bring me a proof from that Maisa. Amalei Dura Darusa Kamar, you're bringing me a proof from that city, that village, that Shimon dug up a little bit and acquired it that way? No. Hasam Bagi Mitmri Habi. Those were valleys that were hidden. What do you mean hidden? Where the owners hid from the tax man. It was a common thing. It wasn't tax evasion. It's not a new invention. They always tried to evade the taxes. Those fields were owned by people who evaded their taxes. They ran away so that the taxman wouldn't find them. And what happened? What was the rule about those fields? The government said, so the owners themselves did not pay the real estate tax, the market to the king. And the king there said, the one who pays the tax gets to work the field. So don't prove anything from there. Over there, the guy didn't really pay his taxes, and the fact that the Jew paid him for it meant nothing. He had no right to sell it because the government said, if you don't pay your taxes, you don't own the field. Anybody who pays the taxes for the field can use the field. So the guy had no right to sell it to Reuben in the first place. So you can't bring a ride from there. Now, what about the basic question itself? So what about the fact that, what do you mean it works that way? Shmuel said, Dina de Malchus Dina. And the king said that the only way you acquire something is with a deed. Oh, that store in Dardus doesn't mean anything. That they weren't paying the taxes, and the government said whoever pays the taxes gets to keep the field. Don't bring a proof from there. So Rashbam points out in the widest lines at the bottom of the page, the beginning of the widest lines, the Mir of Yosef Lo Chazerbo, he didn't, even though Abaye gave him a good answer, those are speaking about abandoned fields that were not, where the taxes were unpaid. Shmuel said his halacha. What about Dina Machusadina? Rabbi Yosef lo Savala Haidamar. He doesn't hold of this sort of bias. Umalka Omer lo Leichel Arel B'Shtara. Delav Dina Machusadina B'Chasuk Kanamilecha. In other words, what was the question on Shmuel? Shmuel said this seemingly strange halacha that if Reuven pays the guy for the field, but he didn't make an acquisition, he gets and Shimon came along and made a chazaka, Shimon gets to keep it. How can you say that? What about Dina Machusadina? Isn't the law of the land that whoever has the shtar, that's the only way you acquire the land? So Rabbi Yosef will say, no, yes, Dina Machusadina, but that's not the law of the land that you can only acquire a field with a shtar. The law of the land is you can acquire it with chazaka too. And here he acquired it with chazaka. So he wasn't going against the law of the land, Dina Machusa, and therefore that's the answer to the question. So therefore Shmuel's halacha stands. Now, do we paskin like him? So here Rashbam in the second of the smaller wide lines, the wide lines that, let's say, the less wide lines near about halfway down the page in the Rashbam, where the lines begin to get wide, and the second line there, Pirush Rabbeinu Chanan, the lesson looks like a Shmuel, because of Abaya's good question about Dina Machusadina. But then Rashbam says in the fifth line, the Ni nearer the Helchus like Shmuel, I hold like Shmuel, the Rav Nachman the Dina, Rav Nachman was a judge, Abe, the Helchus like Kavase, Bedine, done Kavase Kame, he done like him. So whereas before in the Machlokas of digging in a shovel full, you dig up a shovel, you get the whole field, or you get only the shovel. That's Rav says you get the whole field. There, Rav Nachman Paskin like Rav, even though normally Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, we Paskin like Shmuel when it comes to money matters. Here we Paskin like Rav. In this question, it's not even a Machlokas Rav and Shmuel. It's just Shmuel says a seemingly strange halacha, and yet, according to Rashbam, Rav Nachman Paskins like him. Rabbeinu Chanel says, no, we don't paskin like Shmuel. It's a strange halacha to say that you bought the field, Reuben paid for the field, and Shimon could acquire it. No, but Shmuel says that. Rav Huna, now look at the Gemara. Back in the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom of the page in the Gemara. Rav Huna Zavan Aram Kachavim. Rav Huna bought a field from a guy. Similar story like this case of Shmuel. Huna bought a field. Asi Yisrael Echad Rav. And again, Rav Huna did not have a formal acquisition or a shtar. And another Yisrael came, Rav Shimon came along and dug up a little bit porta. Also, that came from Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman Paskin like that the second guy gets to keep it, Shimon gets to keep it. Amalei, my daitach, why? So now Rav Huna complained to Rav Nachman, what's your svara for giving it to Shimon? Damer Shmuel nichsev kachavim, because of Shmuel's halacha, that the assets of a guy that you buy, harein kam midbar, when you pay cash for it, it's like hefker, it's like a desert that belongs to anybody who makes it kozaka because that's why, because you're going like Shmuel. If that's the case, Shmuel, passing like the other Shmuel, Damer Shmuel, lo kana makamakusho. The first halacha that we had in Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, that you only get the place that you dug up. In other words, you're saying that Shimon can acquire the field because that's what Shmuel said, right? That if Reuven paid for it and Shimon made a chazaka, Shimon gets to keep it because Shmuel said that. So you should also go like Shmuel's other halacha that we had at the bottom of the page, where if you had a clearly defined, a bordered field that had clear borders on it, and you dug one shovel full, according to Shmuel, you only get one shovel. That's all you get. You don't get the whole field. So you should go like Shmuel there too. So what if Shimon made a kinyan on the field by digging a little bit there? So give him the little bit that he dug, not the whole field. Only the place where you stuck your shovel in. And that halacha ana, and the gear says kishmai tochsvila. I hold like what you said. Dam Rav Huna Marav. This is Rav Huna argued what came to Rav Nachman. And so Rav Nachman said, when it comes to this halacha of Shimon taking away the field from Reuven who paid for it, I pass him like Shmuel. I should pass him like Shmuel that you only get the one shovel full. Here I hold like you said. So Dam Rav Huna Marav. You said kivim shenikish b'makush echad. Right. Like Rav Huna said the name of Rav. As long as you stuck one shovel full into the ground and a clearly demarcated field, because you get the whole thing. Now Rav Huna Bar Avin also sent this to the yeshiva. The same malacha like Shmuel, that if a Yisrael bought a field from a guy, Reuben paid for it, and before Reuben had a shtar or a chazaka, another Jew, Shimon, came along and acquired it, and he showed a proper acquisition, made a proper chazaka, meaning he executed a proper form of acquisition. You don't take it away from him. Rav Law, they all agreed, all these different rabbis agreed with this halacha like Shmuel, even though it seems strange, but that's how the laws of acquisition work. Now again, it's not speaking about where the guy gave him the keys, or the guy gave him a star, or he made a chazaka. He simply paid cash. Cash doesn't do it. Even though, as then, karka could be neknev b'ketzav shtar chazaka by a Jew, if they agree to it. But the common thing is you need a star, and by the goyim it's always a star. By the goyim it's always a star that you need a star in order to exist. So he never really had a proper acquisition for the goy, so it became hefker, and anybody who could pick it up could pick it up. Does Reuben have a case against Shimon that Shimon should now pay him for it? That's already a machlokas among Rishonim. Shimon could just be a Russian and say, no, I'm not paying for it. Why should I pay you? You threw your money on the ground. You gave your money to the guy. Fine, he abandoned it, and I picked it up. And that's why it's a seemingly strange halacha, but that seems to be the halacha. At least that's what as Rashbam clearly says, that he passed like Shmuel, and Rav Nachman passed like Shmuel, and all these other rabbis also passed like Shmuel in this case. All right, we'll pick him here tomorrow, Mr. Shem, at the beginning of the wide lines. Amar Abahani plus Muli, Anun Ham and Aleph. Have a good day. Shavua Tov to everybody.
Shavua Tov. Beautiful.